What strikes me now as the most wonderful proof of my fitness, or unfitness, for the times, is the fact that nothing people were writing or talking about had any real interest for me. Only the object haunted me, the separate, detached, insignificant thing. It might be a part of the human body or a staircase in a vaudeville house. It might be a smokestack or a button I had found in the gutter. Whatever it was, it enabled me to open up, to surrender, to attach my signature. To the life about me, to the people who made up the world I knew, I could not attach my signature. I was as definitely outside their world as a cannibal is outside the bounds of civilized society. I was filled with a perverse love of the thing in itself, not a philosophic attachment, but a passionate, desperately passionate hunger, as if in this discarded, worthless thing, which everyone ignored, there was contained the secret of my own regeneration. Living in the midst of a world where there was a plethora of the new, I attached myself to the old. In every object there was a minute particle which particularly claimed my attention. I had a microscopic eye for the blemish, for the grain of ugliness which to me constituted the sole beauty of the object. Whatever set the object apart or made it unserviceable, or gave it a date, attracted and endeared it to me. If this was perverse, it was also healthy, considering that I was not destined to belong to this world which was springing up about me. Soon I too would become like these objects which I venerated, a thing apart, a non-useful member of society. I was definitely dated, that was certain, and yet I was able to amuse, to instruct, to nourish, but never to be accepted in a genuine way. When I wished to, when I had the itch, I could single out any man, in any stratum of society, and make him listen to me. I could hold him spellbound if I chose, but like a magician or a sorcerer, only as long as the spirit was in me. At bottom I sensed in others a distrust, an uneasiness, an antagonism which, because it was instinctive, was irremediable. I should have been a clown. It would have afforded me the widest range of expression. But I underestimated the profession. Had I become a clown, or even a vaudeville entertainer, I would have been famous. People would have appreciated me precisely because they would not have understood. But they would have understood that I was not to be understood. That would have been a relief, to say the least. It was always a source of amazement to me how easily people could become riled just listening to me talk. Perhaps my speech was somewhat extravagant, though often it happened when I was holding myself in with main force. The turn of a phrase, the choice of an unfortunate adjective, the facility with which the words came to my lips, the allusions to subjects which were taboo, everything conspired to set me off as an outlaw, as an enemy of society. No matter how well things began, sooner or later they smelled me out. If I were modest and humble, for example, then I was too modest, too humble. If I were gay and spontaneous, bold and reckless, then I was too free, too gay. I could never get myself quite au point with the individual I happened to be talking to. If it were not a question of life and death, everything was life and death to me then. If it was merely a question of passing a pleasant evening at the home of some acquaintance, it was the same thing. There were vibrations emanating from me, overtones and undertones, which charged the atmosphere unpleasantly. Perhaps the whole evening they had been amused by my stories. Perhaps I had them in stitches, as it often happened, and everything seemed to augur well. But sure as fate, something was bound to happen before the evening came to a close. Some vibration set loose which made the chandelier ring, or which reminded some sensitive soul of the piss-pot under the bed. Even while the laughter was still dying off, the venom was beginning to make itself felt. "Hope to see you again sometime," they would say, but the wet, limp hand which was extended would belie the words. Persona non grata. Jesus, how clear it seems to me now. No pick and choice possible. I had to take what was to hand and learn to like it. I had to learn to live with the scum, to swim like a sewer rat or be drowned. If you elect to join the herd, you are immune. To be accepted and appreciated, you must nullify yourself, make yourself indistinguishable from the herd. You may dream, if you dream alike. But if you dream something different, you are not in America. Of America, American, but a Hottentot in Africa, or a Kalmuk, or a chimpanzee. The moment you have a different thought, you cease to be an American. And the moment you become something different, you find yourself in Alaska or Easter Island or Iceland. Am I saying this with rancor, with envy, with malice? Perhaps. Perhaps I regret not having been able to become an American. Perhaps. In my zeal now, which is again American, I am about to give birth to a monstrous edifice, a skyscraper, which will last undoubtedly long after the other skyscrapers have vanished, but which will vanish too when that which produced it disappears. Everything American will disappear one day, more completely than that which was Greek or Roman or Egyptian. This is one of the ideas which push me outside the warm, comfortable bloodstream where, buffaloes all, we once grazed in peace. An idea that has caused me infinite sorrow, for not to belong to something enduring is the last agony. But I am not a buffalo, and I have no desire to be one. I am not even a spiritual buffalo. I have slipped away to rejoin an older stream of consciousness, a race antecedent to the buffaloes, a race that will survive the buffalo. All things, all objects, animate or inanimate, that are different, are veined with ineradicable traits. What is me is ineradicable, because it is different. This is a skyscraper, as I said, but it is different from the usual skyscraper à l'américaine. In this skyscraper, there are no elevators, no 73rd story windows to jump from. If you get tired of climbing, you are shit out of luck. There is no slot directory in the main lobby. If you are searching for somebody, you will have to search. If you want a drink, you will have to go out and get it. There are no soda fountains in this building, and no cigar stores, and no telephone booths. All the other skyscrapers have what you want. This one contains nothing but what I want, what I like. And somewhere in this skyscraper, Valeska has her being. And we're going to get to her when the spirit move me. For the time being, she's all right. Valeska, seeing as how she's 6 feet under and by now perhaps picked clean by the worms. When she was in the flesh, she was picked clean too, by the human worms who have no respect for anything which has a different tint, a different odor. The sad thing about Valeska was the fact that she had blood in her veins. It was depressing for everybody around her. She made you aware of it, whether you wish to be or no. Blood, as I say, and the fact that her mother was a trollop. The mother was white, of course. Who the father was, nobody knew, not even Valeska herself. Everything was going along smoothly until the day an officious little Jew from the vice president's office happened to espy her. He was horrified, so he informed me confidentially, to think that I had employed a colored person as my secretary. He spoke as though she might contaminate the messengers. The next day I was put on the carpet. It was exactly as though I had committed sacrilege. Of course, I pretended that I hadn't observed anything unusual about her, except that she was extremely intelligent and extremely capable. Finally, the president himself stepped in. There was a short interview between him and Valeska, during which he very diplomatically proposed to give her a better position in Havana. No talk of the blood taint. Simply that her services had been altogether remarkable and that they would like to promote her to Havana. Valeska came back to the office in a rage. When she was angry, she was magnificent. She said she wouldn't budge. Steve Romero and Jaime were there at the time, and we all went out to dinner together. During the course of the evening, we got a bit tight. Valeska's tongue was wagging. On the way home, she told me that she was going to put up a fight. She wanted to know if it would endanger my job. I told her quietly that if she were fired, I would quit too. She pretended not to believe it at first. I said I meant it, that I didn't care what happened. She seemed to be unduly impressed. She took me by the 2 hands, and she held them very gently, the tears rolling down her cheeks. That was the beginning of things. I think it was the very next day that I slipped her a note saying that I was crazy about her. She read the note sitting opposite me, and when she was through, she looked me square in the eye and said she didn't believe it. But we went to dinner again that night, and we had more to drink, and we danced. And while we were dancing, she pressed herself against me lasciviously. It was just the time, as luck would have it, that my wife was getting ready to have another abortion. I was telling Valeska about it as we danced. On the way home, she suddenly said, "Why don't you let me lend you $100? The next night I brought her home to dinner, and I let her hand the wife the $100. Before the evening was over, it was agreed upon that Valeska would come to the house the day of the abortion and take care of the kid. The day came, and I gave Valeska the afternoon off. About an hour after she had left, I suddenly decided that I would take the afternoon off also. I started toward the burlesque on 14th Street. When I was about a block from the theater, I suddenly changed my mind. It was just the thought that if anything happened, if the wife were to kick off, I wouldn't feel so damn good having spent the afternoon at the burlesque. I walked around a bit, in and out of the penny arcades, and then I started homeward. It's strange how things turn out. Trying to amuse the kid, I suddenly remembered a trick my grandfather had shown me when I was a child. You take the dominoes, and you make tall battleships out of them. Then you gently pull the tablecloth on which the battleships are floating, until they come to the edge of the table, when suddenly you give a brisk tug and they fall onto the floor. We tried it over and over again, the three of us, until the kid got so sleepy that she toddled off to the next room and fell asleep. The dominoes were lying all over the floor, and the tablecloth was on the floor too. Suddenly Valeska was leaning against the table, her tongue halfway down my throat, my hand between her legs. As I laid her back on the table, she twined her legs around me. I could feel one of the dominoes under my feet, part of the fleet that we had destroyed a dozen times or more. I thought of my grandfather sitting on the bench, the way he had warned my mother one day that I was too young to be reading so much, the pensive look in his eyes as he pressed the hot iron against the wet seam of a coat. I thought of the attack on San Juan Hill, which the Rough Riders had made, the picture of Teddy charging at the head of his volunteers in the big book which I used to read beside the workbench. I thought of the battleship Maine that floated over my bed in the little room with the iron-barred window, and of Admiral Dewey, and of Schley and Sampson. I thought of the trip to the Navy Yard, which I never made, because on the way my father suddenly remembered that we had to call on the doctor that afternoon, and when I left the doctor's office I didn't have any more tonsils, nor any more faith in human beings. We'd hardly finished when the bell rang, and it was my wife coming home from the slaughterhouse. I was still buttoning my fly as I went through the hall to open the gate. She was as white as flour. She looked as though she'd never be able to go through another one. We put her to bed, and then we gathered up the dominoes and put the tablecloth back on the table. Just the other night, in a bistro, as I was going to the toilet, I happened to pass two old fellows playing dominoes. I had to stop a moment and pick up a domino. The feeling of it immediately brought back the battleships, the clatter they made when they fell on the floor, and with the battleships my lost tonsils and my faith in human beings gone. So that every time I walked over the Brooklyn Bridge and looked down toward the Navy Yard, I felt as though my guts were dropping out. Way up there, suspended between the two shores, I felt always as though I were hanging over a void. Up there, everything that had ever happened to me seemed unreal, and worse than unreal, unnecessary. Instead of joining me to life, to men, to the activity of men, the bridge seemed to break all connections. If I walked toward the one shore or the other, it made no difference. Either way was hell. Somehow I had managed to sever my connection with the world that human hands and human minds were creating. Perhaps my grandfather was right. Perhaps I was spoiled in the bud by the books I read. But it is ages since books have claimed me. For a long time now I have practically ceased to read, but the taint is still there. Now people are books to me. I read them from cover to cover and toss them aside. I devour them one after the other, and the more I read, the more insatiable I become. There is no limit to it. There could be no end, and there was none, until inside me a bridge began to form which united me again with the current of life from which as a child I had been separated. A terrible sense of desolation. It hung over me for years. If I were to believe in the stars, I should have to believe that I was completely under the reign of Saturn. Everything that happened to me happened too late to mean much to me. It was even so with my birth. Slated for Christmas, I was born a half hour too late. It always seemed to me that I was meant to be the sort of individual that one is destined to be, by virtue of being born on the 25th day of December. Admiral Dewey was born on that day, and so was Jesus Christ. Perhaps Krishnamurti too, for all I know. Anyway, that's the sort of guy I was intended to be. But due to the fact that my mother had a clutching womb, that she held me in her grip like an octopus, I came out under another configuration. With the bad setup, in other words. They say, the astrologers I mean, that it will get better and better for me as I go on. The future, in fact, is supposed to be quite glorious. But what do I care about the future? It would have been better if my mother had tripped on the stairs the morning of the 25th of December and broken her neck. That would have given me a fair start. When I try to think, therefore, of where the break occurred, I keep putting it back further and further, until there is no other way of accounting for it than by the retarded hour of birth. Even my mother, with her caustic tongue, seemed to understand it somewhat. Always dragging behind like a cow's tail. That's how she characterized me. But is it my fault that she held me locked inside her until the hour had passed? Destiny had prepared me to be such and such a person. The stars were in the right conjunction, and I was right with the stars, and kicking to get out. But I had no choice about the mother who was to deliver me. Perhaps I was lucky not to have been born an idiot, considering all the circumstances. One thing seems clear, however, and this is a hangover from the 25th, that I was born with a crucifixion complex. That is, to be more precise, I was born a fanatic. Fanatic. I remember that word being hurled at me from early childhood on, by my parents especially. What is a fanatic? One who believes passionately and acts desperately upon what he believes. I was always believing in something and so getting into trouble. The more my hands were slapped, the more firmly I believed. I believed, and the rest of the world did not. If it were only a question of enduring punishment, one could go on believing till the end. But the way of the world is more insidious than that. Instead of being punished, you are undermined, hollowed out, the ground taken from under your feet. It isn't even treachery, what I have in mind. Treachery is understandable and combatable. No, it is something worse, something less than treachery. It's a negativism that causes you to overreach yourself. You are perpetually spending your energy in the act of balancing yourself. You are seized with a sort of spiritual vertigo. You totter on the brink, your hair stands on end. You can't believe that beneath your feet lies an immeasurable abyss. It comes about through excess of enthusiasm, through a passionate desire to embrace people, to show them your love. The more you reach out toward the world, the more the world retreats. Nobody wants real love, real hatred. Nobody wants you to put your hand in his sacred entrails. That's only for the priest in the hour of sacrifice. While you live, while the blood's still warm, you are to pretend that there is no such thing as blood and no such thing as a skeleton beneath the covering of flesh. Keep off the grass. That's the motto by which people live. If you continue this balancing at the edge of the abyss long enough, you become very, very adept. No matter which way you are pushed, you always right yourself. Being in constant trim, you develop a ferocious gaiety, an unnatural gaiety, I might say. There are only two peoples in the world today who understand the meaning of such a statement, the Jews and the Chinese. If it happens that you are neither of these, you find yourself in a strange predicament. You are always laughing at the wrong moment. You are considered cruel and heartless, when in reality you are only tough and durable. But if you would laugh when others laugh and weep when they weep, then you must be prepared to die as they die, and live as they live. That means to be right, and to get the worst of it at the same time. It means to be dead while you are alive, and alive only when you are dead. In this company, the world always wears a normal aspect, even under the most abnormal conditions. Nothing is right or wrong, but thinking makes it so. You no longer believe in reality, but in thinking. And when you are pushed off the dead end, your thoughts go with you, and they are of no use to you. In a way, in a profound way, I mean, Christ was never pushed off the dead end. At the moment when he was tottering and swaying, as if by a great recoil, this negative backwash rolled up and stayed his death. The whole negative impulse of humanity seemed to coil up into a monstrous inert mass to create the human integer, the figure one and indivisible. There was a resurrection, which is inexplicable unless we accept the fact that men have always been willing and ready to deny their own destiny. The earth rolls on, the stars roll on, but men, the great body of men which makes up the world, are caught in the image of the one and only one. If one isn't crucified like Christ, if one manages to survive, to go on living, above and beyond the sense of desperation and futility, then another curious thing happens. It's as though one had actually died and actually been resurrected again. One lives a supernormal life, like the Chinese. That is to say, one is unnaturally gay, unnaturally healthy, unnaturally indifferent. The tragic sense is gone. One lives on like a flower, a rock, a tree, one with nature and against nature at the same time. If your best friend dies, you don't even bother to go to the funeral. If a man is run down by a streetcar right before your eyes, you keep on walking just as though nothing had happened. If a war breaks out, you let your friends go to the front, but you yourself take no interest in the slaughter. And so on, and so on. Life becomes a spectacle, and if you happen to be an artist, you record the passing show. Loneliness is abolished, because all values, your own included, are destroyed. Sympathy alone flourishes, but it is not a human sympathy. A limited sympathy, it is something monstrous and evil. You care so little that you can afford to sacrifice yourself for anybody or anything. At the same time, your interest, your curiosity, develops at an outrageous pace. This too is suspect, since it is capable of attaching you to a collar button just as well as to a cause. There is no fundamental, unalterable difference between things. All is flux, all is perishable. The surface of your being is constantly crumbling. Within, however, you grow hard as a diamond, and perhaps it is this hard magnetic core inside you which attracts others to you willy-nilly. One thing is certain, that when you die and are resurrected, you belong to the earth, and whatever is of the earth is yours unalienably. You become an anomaly of nature, a being without shadow. You will never die again, but only pass away like the phenomena about you. Nothing of this which I am now recording was known to me at the time that I was going through the great change. Everything I endured was in the nature of a preparation for that moment when, putting on my hat one evening, I walked out of the office, out of my hitherto private life, and sought the woman who was to liberate me from a living death. In the light of this, I look back now upon my nocturnal rambles through the streets of New York, the white nights when I walked in my sleep, and saw the city in which I was born as one sees things in a mirage. Often it was O'Rourke, the company detective, whom I accompanied through the silent streets. The snow was on the ground and the air chill and frosty, and O'Rourke talking interminably about thefts, about murders, about love, about human nature, about the golden age. He had a habit, when he was well launched upon a subject, of stopping suddenly in the middle of the street and planting his heavy foot between mine, so that I couldn't budge. And then, seizing the lapel of my coat, he would bring his face to mine and talk into my eyes, each word boring in like the turn of a gimlet. I can see again the two of us standing in the middle of a street at 4 a.m, the wind howling, the snow blowing down, and O'Rourke oblivious of everything but the story he had to get off his chest. Always as he talked, I remember taking in the surroundings out of the corner of my eye, being aware not of what he was saying, but of the two of us standing in Yorkville or on Allen Street or on Broadway. Always it seemed a little crazy to me. The earnestness with which he recounted his banal murder stories in the midst of the greatest muddle of architecture that man has ever created. While he was talking about fingerprints, I might be taking stock of a coping or a cornice on a little red brick building just back of his black hat. I would get to thinking of the day the cornice had been installed. Who might be the man who had designed it, and why had he made it so ugly, so like every other lousy, rotten cornice, which we had passed from the east side up to Harlem, and beyond Harlem, if we wanted to push on, beyond New York, beyond the Mississippi, beyond the Grand Canyon, beyond the Mojave Desert. Everywhere in America where there are buildings for man and woman. It seemed absolutely crazy to me that each day of my life I had to sit and listen to other people's stories, the banal tragedies of poverty and distress, of love and death, of yearning and disillusionment. If, as it happened, there came to me each day at least 50 men, each pouring out his tale of woe, and with each one I had to be silent and receive, it was only natural that at some point along the line I had to close my ears, had to harden my heart. The tiniest little morsel was sufficient for me. I could chew on it and digest it for days and weeks, yet I was obliged to sit there and be inundated, to get out at night again and receive more, to sleep listening, to dream listening. They streamed in from all over the world, from every stratum of society, speaking 1,000 different tongues, worshipping different gods, obeying different laws and customs. The tale of the poorest among them was a huge tome, and yet, if each and every one were written out at length, it might all be compressed to the size of the 10 Commandments. It might all be recorded on the back of a postage stamp, like the Lord's Prayer. Each day I was so stretched that my hide seemed to cover the whole world, and when I was alone, when I was no longer obliged to listen, I shrank to the size of a pinpoint. The greatest delight, and it was a rare one, was to walk the streets alone, to walk the streets at night when no one was abroad, and to reflect on the silence that surrounded me. Millions lying on their backs, dead to the world, their mouths wide open and nothing but snores emanating from them, walking amidst the craziest architecture ever invented, wondering why and to what end, if every day from these wretched hovels or magnificent palaces there had to stream forth an army of men itching to unravel their tale of misery. In a year, reckoning it modestly, I received 25,000 tales. In 2 years, 50,000. In 4 years, it would be 100,000. In 10 years, I would be stark mad. Already I knew enough people to populate a good-sized town. What a town it would be, if only they could be gathered together. Would they want skyscrapers? Would they want museums? Would they want libraries? Would they too build sewers and bridges and tracts and factories? Would they make the same little cornices of tin, one like another, on, ad infinitum, from Battery Park to the Golden Bay? I doubt it. Only the lash of hunger could stir them. The empty belly, the wild look in the eye, the fear of worse, driving them on, one after the other. All the same, all goaded to desperation, out of the goad and whip of hunger, building the loftiest skyscrapers, the most redoubtable dreadnoughts, making the finest steel, the flimsiest lace, the most delicate glassware. Walking with O'Rourke and hearing nothing but theft, arson, rape, homicide was like listening to a little motif out of a grand symphony. And just as one can whistle an air of Bach and be thinking of a woman he wants to sleep with, so, listening to O'Rourke, I would be thinking of the moment when he would stop talking and say, "What'll you have to eat?" In the midst of the most gruesome murder, I could think of the pork tenderloin which we would be sure to get at a certain place farther up the line, and wonder too what sort of vegetables they would have on the side to go with it, and whether I would order pie afterwards or a custard pudding. It was the same when I slept with my wife, now and then. While she was moaning and gibbering, I might be wondering if she had emptied the grounds in the coffee pot, because she had the bad habit of letting things slide. The important things, I mean. Fresh coffee was important, and fresh bacon with the eggs. If she were knocked up again, that would be bad. Serious in a way, but more important than that was fresh coffee in the morning and the smell of bacon and eggs. I could put up with heartbreaks and abortions and busted romances, but I had to have something under my belt to carry on, and I wanted something nourishing, something appetizing. I felt exactly like Jesus Christ would have felt if he had been taken down from the cross and not permitted to die in the flesh. I am sure that the shock of crucifixion would have been so great that he would have suffered a complete amnesia as regards humanity. I am certain that after his wounds had healed, he wouldn't have given a damn about the tribulations of mankind, but would have fallen with the greatest relish upon a fresh cup of coffee and a slice of toast, assuming he could have had it. Whoever, through too great love, which is monstrous after all, dies of his misery, is born again to know neither love nor hate, but to enjoy. And this joy of living, because it is unnaturally acquired, is a poison which eventually vitiates the whole world. Whatever is created beyond the normal limits of human suffering acts as a boomerang and brings about destruction. At night, the streets of New York reflect the crucifixion and death of Christ. When the snow is on the ground and there is the utmost silence, there comes out of the hideous buildings of New York a music of such sullen despair and bankruptcy as to make the flesh shrivel. No stone was laid upon another with love or reverence. No street was laid for dance or joy. One thing has been added to another in a mad scramble to fill the belly, and the streets smell of empty bellies, and full bellies, and bellies half full. The streets smell of a hunger which has nothing to do with love. They smell of the belly which is insatiable, and of the creations of the empty belly, which are null and void.